Okay, for lesson 7, we're going to talk about the concept of coterminal angles, and that is in your lesson notes today. For most of our examples so far, we've been solely focusing on angles between 0 and 360. It turns out you could have angles larger than 360. You could also have negative angles. Okay, so when you have two angles that end at the same spot, we call those coterminal angles. And I have a couple of examples here. Okay, in this particular example, I drew a 30-degree angle. But let's say I went around in the circle one time and then moved an additional 30 degrees. Okay, that would be an angle of 390 degrees because I went around in the circle one time, one full rotation, which would be 360 degrees, and then an additional 30. Okay, so 390 degrees and 30 degrees are what we call coterminal angles because they end in the same spot. And it's the same thing if I subtract 360. So in this case, I have an angle of 150 degrees. And if I subtract 360 from it, I get negative 210. Negative 210 would mean rotating 210 degrees in the opposite direction. That would end in the same spot. That is also coterminal. The key with this is right here. If I'm rotating in a counterclockwise direction, that tells me that the angle has to be positive. If I'm rotating in a clockwise direction, then the angle has to be negative. All right, so in this particular example here, I could rotate counterclockwise 150 degrees and get an angle of positive 150, or I could rotate clockwise in the negative direction 210 degrees and get an angle of rotation of negative 210 degrees. Okay. Basically, to sum up the lesson notes, if you want to find a coterminal angle, you can either add or subtract 360. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the examples. Here's our first set of examples. So for each positive angle of rotation of the unit circle around its center, indicate on the unit circle where P is taken and give a negative angle of rotation which takes P to the same location. So the first one is 45 degrees. So I know that this is 0 degrees, and I know that 90 degrees is up here. So 45 degrees is going to be halfway in between. So 45 degrees is going to be up here. So that would be a 45-degree angle. So to figure out a negative angle rotation, I'm simply going to take 45 and I'm going to subtract 360. And I end up with 45 minus 360. I'm using the calculator on my phone. I get a negative angle of rotation of negative 315 degrees. Okay, so that would be the same as starting here and rotating clockwise, negative 315 degrees. Okay, so for 90 degrees, okay, 90 degrees, I already labeled is up here. So to find, again, a negative angle of rotation, I'm going to take 90 and I'm going to subtract 360. So 90 minus 360, use a calculator if you need to, would be the same as a negative 270-degree angle rotation. That would mean rotating 270 degrees clockwise. Okay. 180 is interesting because if I do 180 and I subtract 360, I get negative 180 degrees. Okay. So that is right here. 180 degrees is right here, but it's also negative 180 degrees because that would be either rotating 180 counterclockwise or rotating 180 clockwise. So that one's kind of interesting. 270 degrees. So 270 degrees would be going counterclockwise and ending up right here. Okay. So that would be going counterclockwise and ending up 3/4 of the way around the circle. Okay. But I could also rotate clockwise, starting at 0, but now rotating clockwise, and that would be a 90-degree clockwise rotation for an angle of negative 90 degrees. And what do you know? When you do 270 minus 360, you get negative 90 degrees. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, okay, the second set of examples here. So the ray from the origin through point P, so let's draw a line from the origin to point P, okay, makes a 45-degree angle with the positive x-axis. So this is a 45-degree angle right here. The ray through point Q makes an angle of 210 degrees with the positive x-axis. Okay. What is the angle of rotation from P to Q? So I'm going from 45 to 210. So 45 to 210. To figure out that angle of rotation, I'm simply going to do 210 minus 45. So 210 minus 45 is 165. The question is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? In other words, did I rotate counterclockwise or did I rotate clockwise? So if I'm going from P to Q, if I'm going from P to Q, that is a counterclockwise rotation. A counterclockwise rotation means that this is a positive 165-degree angle because I rotated counterclockwise. So number 2, the answer is 165 degrees. Number 3, what is a different possible angle of rotation from P to Q? Well, in other words, we're going to find a coterminal angle. So a different possible one would be to take 165 and add 360 to it. But what's 165 plus 360? That would be 525 degrees. So that would be like if I started at point P, went completely around the circle once, and then went an additional 165 degrees. So that would be another possible angle of rotation. Okay. What are 2 possible negative angles of rotation from P to Q? So a negative angle of rotation would mean I rotated clockwise. So what number 4 is asking is, what if I started at P, but instead of going counterclockwise, I went clockwise? So to do that, I'm going to take 165 and I'm going to subtract 360 degrees. 165 minus 360 degrees is negative 195. So that would be one possible negative angle of rotation. So starting at P and going 195 degrees clockwise, okay, I could also take negative 195 and subtract 360 again. Okay, what would I get if I subtracted 360 again? I would get negative 555 degrees. So that would be a second possible negative angle of rotation, because that would be taking P, going all the way around the circle once, and then going an additional 195 degrees. So what are two possible negative angles of rotation from P to Q? Negative 195 and negative 555. And that right here is it for lesson 7.